Pranotthana as an activity does not assault sense of individuality. It leaves it intact, okay? Whereas Kundalini does. So again, if you compare here, we are always safer to be with Pranotthana, because Kundalini can trampoline someone in stages of such dissociation or depersonalizations that it will take quite considerable amount of that, let's say, maturity, and psychic resilience to withstand that. I mean, it is literally like jumping off the hill without a parachute, but not even jumping into the void. It's not a pleasant experience. So that's why at some point it's flow out of my tongue some 20 years ago or something. Kundalini takes no prisoners.
So this question is a bit about a three-part question. I'll keep it short. We talked about the cycles and the nature of going through one cycle, coming to the next one. In terms of sadhana, in terms of processing certain karmic information, certain imprints, in the last 2.5, 3 years I've been going through a lot of strong densities, and I feel like I'm done with them, basically. It feels like they are either fading out, but there's always this last bit that feels it keeps stuck, a last bit of density. And in terms of sadhana would be, and also breaking a cycle, how to break a cycle. Would you say there is simply intensity that sometimes is necessary? Or does these things simply have they're just timed and they're just fading out by themselves eventually?
You can already apply that what we spoke earlier with regard to the uniqueness of the end of the astrological cycle, because we will be pushed to complete that. So in other words, it's like, imagine like whatever we've done in the academic year, whatever happened there in the academic year of our life, when it comes the time to complete the year, right, whatever, like tests, exams, I don't know how, in different country, different systems, we are pushed to pass these exams. We are pushed to do tests. So, in other words, everyone would have to pass. And maybe someone will be a rare example of having to repeat, right? But it's more rare, right? Out of the whole class, I don't know, 40 people, for example, maybe 2 people will be made to repeat. I don't know. So, in other words, that what you're speaking of now, it's like riding the wave of changes. In other words, you feel the changes already. You feel you want changes. Bring them on. I'm ready for changes. And something feels like stuck, dense. This is a beautiful, perfect planetary alignment happening, where this will be done on your behalf. But of course, how it will be emotionally experienced, that's different, you see? Because then it's another little very subtle thing here woven in, is we have to go through certain experiences by virtue of connecting to certain register of emotions. In terms of now, let's switch to this esoteric understanding, right? Life fully lived may be understood more superficially in our day and age with regard to what is considered to be life fully lived. Whereas this internal understanding that life fully lived is to experience fully the full register of the emotive states. It's like full register of the colors of the rainbow, right? Like the light of our awareness, right? The translucent light that hits the prism of human physiology and breaks into the different colors of the rainbow. And these colors of the rainbow are hidden behind the heart. They are within the digits of each, if the heart digit like a clock. Someone recently dug out that very old video from Vancouver, like 10, 12 years old video, where I speak about heart dial. It's literally called heart-dial, I think. And someone dug it out and showed it to me and said, look, this and that. I really loved it. And this is how it is, you see? So we have to live all these emotive states fully. And we are not exempt. Changes will already happen on our behalves, but it will be accompanied by how we go through them in terms of our emotional response, you see? And then, of course, by virtue of, let's say, that nature of identity here, it will be very difficult to put it apart. So therefore, it's like we will look back, gosh, this was such a difficult time. Gosh, I was treated so unfairly, or it was so tough, it was so this, so that. But you know what it was, in fact? It was a role, right? You landed that role. You and I are in the theater of life, as William Shakespeare said beautifully. And so each role is different, because otherwise how can we know, right? Like Brad Pitt is a good-looking dude, no? Well, maybe you don't agree, because in my generation, women drool over him big time. And he's a good actor. In fact, it was very difficult for his career to prove that he's a good dramatic actor. Why? Because everything was assigned to his good looks. Why am I giving this example is because in life, we would be given roles, and we would have to play these roles, and these roles will be very different. Why? It's so that all this register is experienced fully, these rasas. See? In the book, Chamatkara, The Hidden Path, this aspect of the rasas, the theory of rasas, rasavada, is touched upon. Very rare topic, yet. Okay, I brought it out in a more kind of accessible language there. So in our memory, it would be we will feel what we went through, whereas in fact, what we went through only in terms of our emotional involvement. If this was a blue phase, right, instead of a yellow phase, right, filled with blue tonality, all kinds of blue, from ultraviolet to the turquoise, Some of them are so feels like that on the heart, Of course, it's different from orange, different from the scarlet like you're wearing now t-shirt, right? When it's bubbly and jolly. So this, just for you to kind of also to see this in complexity of what it is, you see? That density that left over there that you're experiencing, right? At the time when all the slate will be cleaned, is there also for a reason to experience that, right? There's this, something is changing. Maybe the role you played was so good, so dramatic, and now it's another phase, another role to be played. But that role is still with you. Do you know Daniel Day-Lewis, actor? He's the largest winner of all the Oscars, Irish actor. He's notorious for being very, very unusual actor, method actor, very unusual. Last of the Mohicans? No? There Will Be Blood? Well, it's Martin Scorsese. Gangs of New York, yeah. Well, many. He won an Oscar for My Left Foot, when he played the man who could only use his foot, a man with cerebral palsy, to eat, to everything. In between the sets, for example, notoriously, when among the peers and everything, he insisted to be in a role. He ate with his foot between the sets, where he could have just sat down, relaxed, and just ate normally. No, he wanted to remain in a role. And he's notoriously said that he hates acting, because each time he comes out of the role, it takes him months on end to come out of the role. It's very painful, process. There's nothing glamorous about being an actor. And yet his life is like spoiled by fortune and like he's another drop-dead good-looking man. I've met him in London in my heydays. And I tell you, he's as good-looking in flesh, if not more. And I met him freshly shaven like that. Although he's known for good hair. He was like skin-deep shaven on Jermyn Street. I was going to go in a cab and I see him walking into the shop. I walked out and went back and, hey man, just want to pay tribute. It's very down to earth. Beautiful, beautiful man. Married to the daughter of Arthur Miller, Hollywood royalty. So he also is that example of going into the role to such degree that it's difficult to come out of that role, you see? And he notoriously, like recently I've heard, quit acting, like he said, like quit acting. Like every actor wants to act till their last breath, right? These examples are not trivial. I speak about them and I sometimes feel like people take them as lightweight examples, like too maybe even tailored for a popular kind of discourse. No. If you get this, what this represents here in terms of the role, this will help you tremendously. You see? Because I'm not talking about pretending. Do you know what the method school called? Method acting, sorry?
Yes, I know.
You know what it's based on? What's the main key aspect of method acting?
Identification.
Yes, but in what? Yes, exactly. In other words, it was Stanislavski who came up with that. And then it is known today, among the actors and also directors, of course, as method acting. This in turn based on a very, very deep and like quite insightful findings that were made in the theater world. In the theater world, names you would not even know. I'm not going to go. It's a French culture, English culture, 19th century. Okay. Artois, do you know that name? Artois. Well, it's the second half of the 19th century, So that there was a development of a theory that enlightenment can be achieved by proper studying of acting. It has that line. Many directors familiar with that. It's like it exists within theatrical world, within actors, So the method acting, Stanislavski, when he dubbed into it, he brought it out into America, and he brought it into the world, right? This Russian director, right? Russian kind of like a theater critic, right? Like whatever his accolades. And the main aspect here is that an actor has to identify with an emotion in order to portray it. So it's radically different from right kind of placement of the character and everything. So in other words, actor literally needs to feel if the hero lost someone in the script, he needs to go through emotions that are, if not identical, at least replicating the pain that one would feel if one lost something. You see? Right? So this, of course, makes acting into a very, very different enterprise. It's a truly demanding job to be in a role, right? But its relevance in this conversation is that this is what already happening from behind the scenes. You see? Consciousness, in its primal quality of identity, out of its own volition. Volition is will, ikcha. Ikcha jnana kriya, ikcha jnana kriya, remember that. Okay? If this is your first crash into Tantra, in this immersion, let this be clearly understood. Everything is ikcha jnana kriya. Volition, okay? Knowledge and action. Volition, knowledge, action. Okay? So, out of its own volition plays a particular role, by virtue of identifying. So as you can see, Shai White's perspective, it's not you or me or anyone else who forgets his nature. This is a different spiritual perspective. It's always Shiva. This is what many people don't get it. It's never about you and I. It's always Shiva's role, Shiva's play, Shiva's consciousness always plays itself. And identity here is like, you cannot be blamed for what you have not done. And at the very same time, it is your own very property. You see the paradox, how it tightens itself, right, as a string. Only if it tightens itself as a string, you can begin to tune this, what Tantra is all about. Okay, so maybe to your next one.
I feel like it's not too much about identification, because I feel like I know this is not who I am, or this is not necessarily me. It's just that it's difficult to access the emotion, like to simply feel, to really feel them, because there's a certain, of course the mind gets in the way, right? And there's like certain patterns that keep me from experiencing deeply those emotions, which then lead to a certain disconnect or a certain release of that density. So practically speaking, in terms of sadhana or in terms of just going forward, what's a practical approach to certain, maybe unconscious identifications that are still there, to push the intensity a bit, to help them?
And if you heard me attentively, I'm giving a very different stab at it. See, so there is no illusion of identity or misidentity. See? It's a property of awareness. It's like we're giving it a different POV. We're taking that step. We're making this into a possibility of applying higher means. Okay? Even if it doesn't hold, then we would have to then land and then be on a individually based ground. We can build from there. And again, we'll sleep, and again, and that's what sadhana is. Sadhana is a continuous application of different means until it literally so much ground is covered, nothing is lost, and it's so solid as well. So we can lean on that, build on that. See? Certainly always land on that. So it's simply given so that the identity is that there's no individual who identifies with the body. That's number one quantum leap in understanding. Right? Because in yoga, of course, I've been in the ashrams in my young years, like yourself. And I've heard this and I've read this, and and it is helpful. For someone who walks off the street, it's very good to stop them in their tracks right? And bring this as a reminder. But there is also levels of subtlety and degree of understanding. So this is why the analogy of acting, see? The analogy of that where identity belongs to the supreme. There's no, if there was an identity, right? If we could just use this as a garment we wear, we can take our individuality at night and put it in a cupboard. No, but awareness does that anyway, by virtue of simply having these fluctuations in frequencies as waking, dreaming, deep sleep states of consciousness. In deep sleep, there's no identity, right? In deep sleep, nobody suffers from any notions, ideas. But then when we wake up from deep sleep, then we very quickly recollect. And of course, there's a practice, there's a yoga nidra. One can, you can even, getting out of bed is yoga. What is yoga? What is it all about? It's to maintain uninterrupted awareness. And uninterrupted awareness means at all times. At some point, I want you to understand that intensity all need to be as a fuel into sadhana. You see? All that intensity of your character. Just as what I spoke earlier about Rahu, this kid on a block, right? Full of himself, full of this, full of that. And yet the presence of Saturn will begin to shape Rahu's unimpeded nature into something worthwhile. So likewise here, like someone who spots the talent in any field, boxing, basketball, kung fu, anything, right? And they will see whatever is the most intense in this person. A skillful tutor will do that. A violin player can be also taught skillfully applying that. So fuel that intensity into your sadhana. You see? So I would even I personally prefer, by virtue of my own, let's say, kind of setup, those who have that intensity. You see? Those who truly have that intensity of character. By virtue of the intensity of that character, they achieve. How they do that, it's beside the point. You see? So if someone already has this very peaceful, very sattvic, very, very this kind of composed predisposition, you'll think, oh, they're very best placed for meditation and everything. But it may take them much longer, because the realization of the self here has nothing to do with what we're talking about as the qualities of character, how it displays itself. Therefore, in my discourses, I said, any gangsters here? Well, it takes true gangsters, the guys who used to rob banks and stuff. And, it takes some courage, Any cowboys, because if yes, then job can be done. Why? Because that very force is there already. That very force. Valmiki, great sage of this Ramayana and Mahabharata, right? Valmiki. Have you heard that name?
The name is.
Yeah, it simply means ant hill. He was a greatest gangster of his time. Robber gangster, and he was really a man whose hands were full of blood up to his shoulders. And yet his life was transformed utterly and entirely when he has some encounters. And when that one particular encounter took place, he got completely absorbed into meditation and sat in samadhi for a very long time, so long, in fact, that ants built a house on top of his body. And hence his name from there on, Valmiki. But historically he is known, and he stands as an example of how man's nature can be transformed into a great sage. So therefore that intensity, you see, that you speak of, simply have to be that what fuels your tapas, that spiritual ardor. If that intensity goes somewhere else, then of course that can be that same power that can destroy us, that same power that contributes to the greatest good. And that, of course, it's only you can recognize that within yourself. Someone may point that, you maybe if you have good karma, then you will have such a set of circumstances when you will be surrounded by people who will constantly remind you really what this is all about. Then your life will proceed in that direction. Like increases like, right? So this intensity in itself is to be worked with. That's the answer. So the emotions, you're still young, right? Not too young, but young, 25, right? You said earlier, 26. It's a good age, A lot of people do a lot of other things at this age, like totally oblivion, not even, so you're already on the path. You're already giving yourself to this science of self-transformation, right? You already entered the path of self-transformation. So you must have done something right somewhere at some point. So let that intensity, be that fuel, that gunpowder used for the right cause.
The last inquiry was about the Kriyas themselves. So there's all sorts of things happening, certain things that are repeating, certain things that are seemingly known for their expression. Is there any significance to those? Is there something to be known about these things, or does it, in your opinion, not matter much? Just let's being expressed and continuing to let it unfold, that's it? When it comes to certain deities, they have certain expressions, they have certain names, they have certain things that come through. Is that of importance? Is that of even interest to you?
Okay, so let's separate wheat from the chaff. So there are these manifestations, that belongs to the purification, right, of samskaras. So when there is activation of pranic activity, right, when prana gets active, then it is the first, and what it does is just begins to go into the areas where it seldom visited. In other words, this expansion of the subtle body begins. And subtle body is polluted in us modern people, of course. We don't know to what degree it was with the ancients, but even if we read the literature and texts and scriptures that were written 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and they talk about samskaras. Gosh, little do they know where we will end up in this century, Like the level of, let's say, pollution in the astral field is enormous. So therefore, of course, this is always borderlines with psychosis, unfortunately. And what makes this job not as straightforward is that at an individual level, we think it's only happened to me and I'm doing my work, but of course it's not the case. This is where the family tree, right? This is where we begin to purify samskaras that belong to the, through the DNA connection, through the epigenetics. So that it's kind of like, because the astral realm obviously is called astral, right, subtle, because it is beyond this realm of the physical universe where time and space divides everything, right? Articulates and so forth, creates sense of sequence, right? In the astral world, things don't work quite like that. So therefore, we can, for example, feel, well, this release of certain traumas or impressions, doesn't have to be traumas, right? Trauma gained quite a popularity, it's strong, like very charged with connotations term. Impressions. What impression? Something impressed our psyche, right? Left an imprint, and the psyche doesn't quite naturally bounce back, right? If you put into a sponge, like something, sponge will take the shape of that, but then it will bounce back, or even in certain other forms, it will then. But if you put it into a clay, it will create a mold of that. So that's an impression. See? So whatever the density of that in our, let's say, psychic field, then there is a more propensity to end up having it being pressed with impressions. And so this, another analogy on the samskaras. You know, we can speak about samskaras like this, for example, piece there, when I talk about it as grooves in a record, right? Certain impressions create grooves, and then when they're deep enough, then that's where the attention goes. Fine. Some of this being spun out, and then something totally comes and as a surprise, because it kind of like, where's that come from? Well, that's where the family tree is being touched. Something that comes from behind the scenes. Something that maybe your mother or father or your grandmother even felt. Some aspirations, some, let's say, deep desires, something that was not possible to fulfill then, left strong impressions, and by virtue of this epigenetics passed on into the family records books, right? And the family record through DNA. So all that in true, let's say, activation takes place. See? If we to leave Kundalini aside, because Kundalini can deal with that, and depending on violent, intermediate, or gradual awakening, it can deal with that in accord with that. You know, in the violent awakening, it can just disregard all that, and it just then depends how strong is the wiring system, because it will just unplug and throw and spit the system. You know, true Kundalini awakening is the most horrifying picture. It's not at all photogenic, and it's not at all not filmable, not something that look pretty on record. You know, that traditionally people were sent away to perform that sadhana, at least, you know. So, of course, in our day and age, everything goes, and so partially in our work as well. We allow certain things happen here for that very reason, because how else we will learn? We don't have clinical facility. So, therefore, the activation of prana, the Pranotthana, is more preferable because it doesn't have this, let's say, complete and utter disregard. If you watch that video, we did put out video on Pranotthana versus Kundalini. Yeah? The chief differences in this part, with regard to this, is that Pranotthana as an activity does not assault sense of individuality. It leaves it intact, okay? Whereas Kundalini does. So again, if you compare here, we are always safer to be with Pranotthana, because Kundalini can trampoline someone in stages of such dissociation or depersonalizations that it will take quite considerable amount of that, let's say, maturity, and psychic resilience to withstand that. I mean, it is literally like jumping off the hill without a parachute, but not even jumping into the void. It's not a pleasant experience. So that's why at some point it's flew out of my tongue some 20 years ago or something. Kundalini takes no prisoners. Whereas Pranotthana is almost could be seen as a therapeutic process, like a grand mega therapy. It should be looked into now by all professionals, particularly psychiatrists and psychologists. See, psychologists left. We had one and only psychologist and left today. She might have learned a thing or two to add to her field of interest, because it's very important that these processes are, I firmly believe, way forward from where we are in terms of the globally growing cases of psychosis. Psychosis is a very state of collective consciousness. And it's dangerous because psychosis leads to, well, major breakdown, major, I'm not even going to go into the really statistics. Statistics are very glim. So what I want you to simply understand is that you need to buckle yourself up for whatever is being spun out of the system. And whatever feels as something that like simply just that psychic debris, you still have to go through that. But periodically there would be something there that kind of like indicates that, like a signpost, Otherwise it feels like a maze. And driving somewhere, you don't know, am I driving around the circles now? Right? Like in an unknown terrain, and plus it also has maybe different landscape in terms of hills, mountains. So it's like, was it straight? There's no straight road. But then there's a signpost, and these experiences come. You see? And these experiences come, and okay, and that is all right. So I'm not just locked in a loop. See that there is. It's signposted here. Sometimes you will be able to recognize them when the intuition grows. At other times, you would need to have help of an adept or someone who understands this, preferably went through this process firsthand, to simply, yes, that is signpost, keep going, that's good. This, disregard, false sign. Okay? Ignore it. And so we all need to learn, when it comes to this, what to ignore and what to pay attention. See? What to ignore and what to pay attention. Like, for instance, when you drive down to, Big Sur, if your driver sucks, it's a spectacular drive, you have to keep your eyes on the road, man. Your whole family goes, wow, wow, wow. And it's like, Big Sur is a beautiful drive to Los Angeles from North California. It's very difficult, right? And who knows that? You must know that, yeah? It's a very well-known, very scenic route, known Big Sur. You can even get souvenir up there in the shop, like knife or something like that you made Big Sur, right? Because it's a journey. So I used to give this also as an analogy, as an example, because in meditation it may feel as that, right? You're driving and the scenery starts to open up. Where do you keep your attention? It's one of those, you see? It's not to start paying attention to the scenery. This is where your attention goes only on all the curves of the road, all inclinations. So other than that, all this is part and parcel of this. You see? And when I say buckle up, it's, it can take for a while. And then, of course, never create, know that this is a byproduct. And knowing that this is byproduct, it creates an attitude of detachment. So you know that this is part and parcel. Read spiritual autobiographies because that also informs you in many ways in terms of the richness of the process, and not to get lost in that as well. You see? And warning you against the superficial side of what, now day and age almost seems like, because it's there, like everything is like, you'd be surprised how many people, the lady who was here and then didn't come back, right? Who asked me, is Kundalini rising once or many times, right? You know how many people were, like, sometimes on the first evening, like, person sitting like that, first evening, that used to be that spot, just behind Bart. Like, year after year, can I have it? And the first question, when my Kundalini fully risen, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, when your Kundalini fully risen, there's no questions left, man. When your Kundalini fully risen, pass on your microphone. You would be with the microphone, broadcasting something worthwhile, and it just gets so funny. Like, my Kundalini rising, it just became so trivialized. So trivialized. We spoke about it the other night in a tradition where the term Kundalini itself comes from. That term was used only on rare occasions with a tremendous degree of veneration by adepts who were made by that power of the goddess. You see? So of course, but this is part and parcel of living in our age. Everything goes. It's postmodernism. Something good maybe will come out of that. Maybe this is what we have to go through. It makes things easier, but it makes things more difficult. Just as an example, when I got my first computer, which was about 2002, 2000, something like that, ever. I was like computer illiterate, just like, but I felt I want to just, And when you would Google, hardly anything will come up on a topic. Hardly anything means nothing. Okay? 10 years after, quite a bit of information. If you Google now, right? Gosh, you'd have to go through the pages and pages and pages. And some of this information would be some really brilliant, very, very helpful, But a lot of it would be very confusing, very, very misleading. Misleading either way, Either those who frighten and cause fears, or those who say that's walk in the park. Kundalini knows it all. It's supreme intelligence. Don't worry, she'll take care of you. No, she won't. If you want her to take care of you, there will be no you left. It will be vaporized, because that's the power of universe, the creative power. It's like literally. If you read Swami Muktananda, in his ashram, he used to advise certain, let's say, not certain, visitors of his ashram back in the days. I knew that from first hands. Not to go, don't go to this temple, don't go to this temple, don't go to this temple. Never go to Kali temple, You don't go, you go to the Lakshmi temple anytime. Don't go to these temples which you have no idea culturally what it means. Certain temples created only for sacrifices. Goats are killed there, blood spilled, sacrifices performed. So, because there were casualties. casualties. People go and either go mad completely, commit suicides, throw themselves off the rocks, because the psychic field is so intense. And some this very, very well watched vlogger, puts on the cover of her video debunking myth of Kundalini, and she goes on about that Kundalini is supreme intelligence and she knows it all, so nothing to worry about. It will take care of itself. This is a recipe for disaster. Irresponsible thing. Is she specializing on Kundalini? No. She simply added it to her CV. She doesn't talk about Kundalini ever, suddenly she's debunking Kundalini. Because when you look at the channel, but millions of followers, hundreds of thousands and millions of views. So that's just like, let's say, an additional bonus. You carve your own path. Go into this proper, as a pro. You see? Just veer off all this kind of popularized, look into what, and taste, try, sense, feel, ask, and receive answers. Watch your dreams. Information will come there. Ask questions. Your meditation will guide you. Smell, okay? How does it smell? What does it smell like, right? And then that's with grace, you'd be led to what is yours, to what you are, to your essence. And that intensity will help you. So don't discard that intensity just yet.